Teenage years can be tough, and sometimes teenagers make costly mistakes. But what if I told you that some teens have made costly mistakes for which they're facing life in prison? In this video, we will delve into a world where the unimaginable happens. Contrary to what you might think, teens can indeed find themselves in situations involving murder. Join us as we explore the most dangerous teens reacting to getting life in prison. It's a topic that will leave you shocked and questioning just how these young lives took such a dark turn. 20. Taylor Smith. In a startling turn of events, Taylor Smith, a young teenager from Washington, found herself in deep trouble when her reckless actions led to her former bridge companion being hauled away in handcuffs. This incident unfolded in Clark County, where Taylor was sentenced after spending several days behind bars. Taylor Smith, a juvenile from Washington, faced the consequences of her actions as she pleaded guilty to reckless endangerment. Her recklessness revolved around a fateful incident involving her friend, Jordan Holgerson. On that unfortunate day, August 7, 2018, a 60-foot bridge at Moulton Falls Regional Park bore witness to a shocking incident. Taylor was caught on camera pushing Jordan off the bridge, sending shockwaves across the internet. As the viral footage made its rounds, Taylor Smith was held accountable for her actions. Her sentence included 2 days in jail and 38 days of labor on a work crew. In addition to the time served, she was slapped with a $300 fine and a 2-year restraining order prohibiting contact with Jordan. The consequences of Taylor's actions were severe, as Jordan Holgerson suffered 6 shattered ribs and 2 ruptured lungs from the fall. During the trial, Clark County District Court Judge Darvin Zerman emphasized the gravity of Jordan's injuries. Judge Zerman even suggested that some jail time was warranted. Taylor's sentencing proceedings included heartfelt statements from the victim, her mother, and the defendant herself. Still grappling with the trauma, Jordan needed a victim advocate to read her statement. She vividly recounted her harrowing experience. "This nightmare began for me while I was plummeting through the air and was afraid. I thought I was going to die when I was being hauled from the water because I couldn't breathe and was watching my body change color by the second." Taylor's mother, Janelle Holgerson, didn't mince words in her statement to the judge. She believed that Taylor's actions were willful, and she argued that Taylor should spend as many days in jail as her daughter had spent in the hospital following the incident, which amounted to 3 days. Initially, Taylor had pleaded not guilty in September. However, a month later, she had a change of heart when prosecutors offered her a settlement that didn't involve jail time. Instead, they proposed 60 days of home confinement, 30 days of work crew service, and 30 days of community service as an alternative. In court, Taylor expressed her remorse and apologized to Jordan and her family, acknowledging her personal growth. She said tearfully, "I'd like to sincerely apologize to Jordan Holgerson and her family and friends for the pain and humiliation I have caused by my mindless actions last summer." While Taylor's actions didn't result in a life sentence, they were undeniably perilous and could have had fatal consequences under different circumstances. Jordan Holgerson, remarkably, survived the 60-foot fall into the water, an outcome that is often fatal for most individuals. 19. Matthew Borges. Matthew Borges, a 19-year-old teenager from Lawrence, Massachusetts, found himself facing some incredibly serious charges of first-degree murder. The court didn't show any leniency when they declared him guilty of this crime, citing the intentional planning and sheer brutality involved. The victim, Lee Manuel Viloria, was just 15 years old when this horrifying incident occurred in 2016. During the trial, the jury was subjected to some gruesome details. They heard testimonies from those who directly encountered the crime scene, such as the person who stumbled upon Lee's lifeless body. The incident occurred when Matthew and Lee were sophomores attending Lawrence High School in 2016. Matthew's charges were shocking. He was accused of beheading Lee. The last time anyone saw Lee alive was on November 18, 2016, when Matthew claimed they were together, smoking marijuana. It wasn't until December 1, 2016, that Lee's remains were discovered. One of the key witnesses, Umar Medina, recounted his disturbing discovery while walking his dog along the Merrimack River. He immediately contacted his then-girlfriend to confirm what he had stumbled upon before alerting the police. Lawrence Police Detective William Olivieri and the initial responders saw a gruesome sight, a headless body with missing hands. Sergeant Brian O'Neill from the Massachusetts State Police, who served as a death investigator in 2016, remembered the meticulous search that led to another eerie find, a plastic bag floating in the river. When he retrieved and opened it, the contents sent shivers down the spines of those present. In the end, Matthew faced the gravest consequences. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 long years. This tragic case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can result from the choices teenagers make. 18. Tony Farmer. Tony Farmer, a prominent high school basketball player hailing from Garfield Heights, Ohio, may not have been handed a life sentence, but there's no denying the danger that surrounded his actions. He found himself facing a 3-year prison term, the minimum sentence for one of 2 counts he was charged with. In addition to this, he was slapped with a 2-year jail term for a second-degree felony charge of felonious assault. Tony put his ex-girlfriend, Andrea Lane, through a terrifying experience of kidnapping and assault. In April 2012, he was found guilty of robbery and intimidation related to this awful incident that took place in the lobby and parking lot of Andrea's apartment complex. Adding to the grim picture, Tony had sent threatening text messages to his former girlfriend. Disturbingly, the entire incident was captured on video from the apartment complex's surveillance cameras. In the courtroom, the judge made it clear that Tony's punishment would be reevaluated in 180 days. Before his legal troubles, Tony Farmer, a towering 6'6" athlete, consistently ranked among the top 100 prospects in the class of 2013 during his high school career. Although he eventually fell from that esteemed list, colleges like Xavier, Dayton, Ohio State, Michigan State, Iowa, West Virginia, and Illinois continued to recruit him during his senior year. The trial of Tony Farmer became a subject of widespread public attention, sharply dividing public opinion across the nation. While some believed he deserved the harshest penalties for his actions, many, including the victim, held a different view. During the trial, an assembly of Garfield Heights residents, including school staff and students, stood by their once-admired hero in court. Ultimately, in August 2012, Tony Farmer was found guilty of the crimes committed against his ex-girlfriend and sentenced to 3 years in prison by the presiding judge, Pamela Barker. 17. Evan Miller. Evan Miller, just 14 years old at the time, was in a grim situation in Alabama. He and another teenager brutally attacked Cole Cannon with a bat and then set fire to his trailer back in 2003. The consequences were severe. Evan was tried, convicted of murder, and sentenced to life in prison without any chance of parole. This grim tale took a turn when the United States Supreme Court stepped in. They ruled that mandatory life sentences without parole for teenagers violated the 8th Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. This decision led to the release of several incarcerated young offenders across the nation. But for Evan, there was no such luck. In 2021, Lawrence Circuit Judge Mark Craig decided that Evan, despite being a mere teen at the time of the crime, met the legal criteria for a life sentence without parole. Judge Craig's reasoning was clear. The severity of Evan's crime, in his eyes, outweighed any considerations of Evan's age or troubled past. Evan's defense argued that he deserved a chance at eventual release, but the judge firmly believed that a life sentence without parole was the only just punishment, dismissing the option of life with parole eligibility after 30 years. Before delivering this life-altering sentence, the court quoted Evan as shockingly saying, "I am God," just moments before delivering the fatal blow to his victim. These chilling words left an indelible mark on the judge, who believed that Evan couldn't be rehabilitated and had been the primary aggressor in the murder. In Judge Craig's view, Cole Cannon might still be alive today if he hadn't made the choices he did on that fateful night. The judge saw Evan as cunning rather than impulsive, which further cemented his decision. Fast forward to today, Evan is 32 years old and attended his hearing through a video link from the Alabama prison where he's incarcerated. His life story is a somber reminder of the consequences of extreme violence committed by teenagers and the complex questions it raises about justice, punishment, and rehabilitation. 16. Terrence Andrus. Meet Terrence Andrus, a young man from Texas who found himself in a terrible situation. Back in 2008, when Terrence was just 20 years old, he was involved in a tragic incident. He ended up taking the lives of Avelina Diaz and an innocent bystander named Kim Fong. This horrifying event occurred during a carjacking attempt, while Terrence was under the influence of a dangerous mix of drugs, including PCP-laced marijuana. The consequences were severe as he was convicted of murder and initially sentenced to death. However, Terrence's case took a twist. It made its way to the United States Supreme Court. The highest court in the land ruled that Terrence had received extremely poor legal advice during his murder trial. They were convinced that his legal team had failed to provide critical evidence that could have influenced the jury's decision. In simple terms, the Supreme Court believed that Terrence didn't get a fair shot at defending himself in court. They found a mountain of evidence that could have lessened his punishment, but none of it was presented to the jury. Despite this significant ruling, things took a surprising turn in Texas. The state's court system openly defied the Supreme Court's decision and upheld Terrence's death sentence. They argued that he hadn't proven that his lawyer's mistakes had truly harmed his case. In essence, they disagreed with the Supreme Court's conclusion that Terrence's legal representation was seriously flawed. So, this is the story of Terrence Andrus, a young Texan who went through a roller coaster of legal battles after committing a terrible crime at a very young age. 15. Jessica Carline. In a recent case in Natrona County, a 17-year-old girl named Jessica Carline found herself facing jail time due to her involvement in a tragic car crash right in front of the Wyoming Medical Center. This devastating incident resulted in the loss of 2 young lives. It all happened on that fateful night of September 17, 2015, when Jessica was behind the wheel of a car that tragically collided with a tree, igniting a fiery inferno. Sadly, both of her passengers, Tanner Conroy, aged 16, and Dylan Brock, aged 17, lost their lives in the immediate aftermath of the accident. Jessica took responsibility for her actions and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of vehicular homicide back in December. As a consequence of her plea, she received a sentence of 4 to 20 years in jail. After serving 4 years, she will be eligible for parole. The weight of this situation is profoundly distressing, especially when we consider the young ages of those involved. 14. Kyandria Cook. Kyandria Cook, a 19-year-old young woman from Daytona Beach, Florida, faced a tough situation when she received an 11-year prison sentence for her involvement in 2 carjackings. The story revolves around Kyandria and her then-boyfriend Kendrick Bass, who were accused of a crime that shook the small town of South Daytona. The incident in question unfolded when Kyandria and Kendrick allegedly lured a man and his friend to South Daytona with the sinister intention of carjacking them. Tragically, things took a horrifying turn when Kendrick shot and critically wounded one of the victims during the attack. Let's rewind to June 2017, a pivotal moment in this gripping tale. Kyandria's initial sentencing made headlines when she was slapped with a staggering 20-year prison term. The courtroom scene was heart-wrenching as the footage captured her mother's uncontrollable sobs upon hearing the verdict. Kyandria herself couldn't hold back her tears, ultimately needing assistance to exit the courtroom as she appeared to pass out from the overwhelming shock. However, fate had more twists in store for Kyandria. In an unexpected turn of events, Circuit Judge McFoxman granted her request to withdraw her initial plea and overturned the seemingly harsh sentencing. The reason behind this reversal was cited as a misunderstanding between Kyandria and her assistant public defender, Frank Scott. The second sentencing, in stark contrast to the first, saw a composed Kyandria shedding no tears. Her mother, too, managed to maintain her composure, with no sobbing witnessed in the courtroom. There was no need for bailiffs to intervene this time around, marking a significant departure from the previous emotional scene. In the midst of this roller coaster of events, Kyandria couldn't help but sense that something ominous was looming over her. Besides the 11-year prison sentence, Kyandria was also given a concurrent 20-year probation period. This means that she will remain under probation's watchful eye even while incarcerated. This dramatic series of events highlights the unpredictability of life and the justice system. Kyandria Cook's story serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the course of justice can take unexpected turns, leaving young individuals like her with a long road ahead, both behind bars and under probation's shadow. 13. Denali Bremer. Denali Bremer, a 22-year-old woman from Anchorage, Alaska, made a shocking admission when she pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of 19-year-old Cynthia Hoffman. This tragic incident unfolded near Thunderbird Falls in Chugiak, Alaska. It's a chilling tale that involves deceit, manipulation, and a heart-wrenching loss. According to reports, a person named Tyler approached Denali with an offer that defied belief, several $1 million in exchange for abducting and killing Cynthia. What makes this story even more disturbing is that a group of 3 young adults, who were completely unsuspecting, became entangled in this web of deception, all orchestrated by an individual from Indiana. They were lured into committing this heinous crime for money. Denali, cunning and manipulative, convinced Cynthia to join her on a hike to Thunderbird Falls after a visit to Alaska's Matanuska-Susitna borough. Little did Cynthia know that this seemingly innocent adventure would turn into a nightmare. Denali and an accomplice used duct tape to restrain Cynthia and committed the unthinkable act of murder. Shockingly, they documented the horrifying ordeal for the person who ordered this unspeakable crime. It wasn't until February 15, 2023, that Denali stood before Anchorage Superior Court Judge Andrew Peterson and admitted her guilt. The charges against her stemmed from the brutal murder of Cynthia Hoffman on June 2, 2019. Denali acknowledged the accuracy of the allegations outlined in the initial complaint filed in the lawsuit. The investigation into this gruesome crime involved the Anchorage Police Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, with the cooperation of numerous other state and federal law enforcement agencies. This case serves as a reminder of the depths to which some individuals can sink and the devastating consequences that follow their actions. 12. Heavenly Arroyo. Let's talk about a chilling case that unfolded in Fall River, Massachusetts, involving a 15-year-old girl named Heavenly Arroyo from Rochester, New York. It all started back on October 6, 2019, when a tragic incident occurred. On that fateful Sunday, a 68-year-old woman named Ana Vasquez Rodriguez lost her life to a brutal stabbing. The one responsible? None other than Heavenly Arroyo. She found herself in a Fall River courthouse shortly after the incident, facing grave charges. The events leading up to that day are haunting. Ana Vasquez Rodriguez, who was 68 years old and bedridden due to a stroke, lived in Heavenly's residence. In fact, Ana and her family had tried to adopt Heavenly earlier that very day, but something went terribly wrong. Following her arrest, Heavenly was observed in the Fall River Police Department's interrogation room. Reports suggest she was muttering to herself, and an officer claimed to have heard her say, "I killed the old lady, and I'm sorry." Heavenly displayed an unsettling demeanor even during her initial court appearance on October 7, 2019. She reportedly grinned when her name was mentioned and said, "That's me." She even expressed gratitude to the judge. However, she was swiftly detained without bail, and the gravity of her situation began to sink in. It's essential to remember that Heavenly Arroyo was just 15 years old, facing the criminal justice system for the first time. Her attorney, John Geary, commented on her situation. "She's 15 years old, and this is her first experience." He emphasized that she might not fully grasp the severity of her actions. On January 18, 2023, Heavenly Arroyo pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She was subsequently sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 19 years. The horrifying truth is that on that October day in 2019, Heavenly had entered Ana Vasquez Rodriguez's room and subjected her to a brutal attack, stabbing her an astounding 70 times with a pair of scissors. Due to her frail health, Ana was unable to defend herself, and the consequences were nothing short of tragic. Now, let's address the question that inevitably arises: what should be done with a 15-year-old who has committed such a heinous crime? Despite her age and reported mental health issues, the facts of the case indicate that Heavenly Arroyo posed a clear danger to the community. Thus, the decision was made to incarcerate her in a state prison, a punishment deemed fitting given the gravity of her actions. The case of Heavenly Arroyo is undoubtedly a heart-wrenching one. It serves as a stark reminder that tragedy can strike from unexpected sources, and it raises important questions about how our society deals with young individuals who commit grave crimes. 11. Jacob Mozan and Drake Campbell. In the heart of Berkeley County, South Carolina, a somber event unfolded that would forever change two young teenagers' lives. Meet Jacob Mozan, just 11 years old, and Drake Campbell, a mere 18. Their world was turned upside down when a judge decided to keep them in jail. The reason? Their alleged involvement in a tragic house invasion that shook the community. The charges against these two teens are nothing short of devastating. Murder, attempted murder, burglary, and not one, but 2 counts of armed robbery. As the family gathered in the bond court, tears flowed freely when the judge said their pleas for bond would be denied. Both Jacob and Drake, overwhelmed by the gravity of their situation, couldn't hold back their sobs. It was a desperate scene, as Jacob's sister made a heartfelt plea to the judge saying, "Jacob is my best friend." She acknowledged the wrongdoing, but emphasized that he is not inherently wicked. Jacob's mother too expressed remorse for her son's actions, saying, "We apologize for him." With a heavy heart, she added, "I know their hearts are breaking for them, and I'm sorry." The victim of the home invasion, Kadeem Johnson, a 27-year-old man, met a tragic end. Court records indicate that he was fatally shot in the head at his Martha Lane residence during the heinous ordeal. Handcuffed and forced to kneel as his home was ransacked, Johnson's life was taken in a horrifying manner. Adding to the complexity of this case is the fact that Jacob had plans to join the National Guard in August, and Drake had already enlisted in the Navy. Their family members were quick to vouch for their character, declaring, These are not awful, terrible children. However, in South Carolina, a summary court judge lacks the authority to grant bond for murder charges. Consequently, the fate of these two young lives rests in the hands of a circuit court judge who will preside over their case at a later date. The road ahead for Jacob Mozan and Drake Campbell is uncertain, and the weight of their alleged crimes is undoubtedly heavy. In a small town in South Carolina, a community is left grappling with the profound impact of this tragic event while two families are torn apart, holding on to the hope that justice will prevail in the end. 10. Tyler Scraggs. Tyler Scraggs found himself in a devastating situation when he was charged with DUI in connection with the tragic death of a young girl in Greenville County, South Carolina. In a recent courtroom hearing, he took responsibility for his actions by pleading guilty. Tyler, who was just 18 years old at the time, made a terrible decision that would change his life forever. He was driving under the influence of methamphetamine when he crashed his vehicle on Taylor Road in Greenville County back in November of last year. Tragically, the collision claimed the life of a 16-year-old girl named Haley Cantrell, who was a passenger in Tyler's car. Haley fought for her life for several days but succumbed to her injuries. The legal consequences of Tyler's actions were severe. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and got some credit for the time he had already spent behind bars. At the time of his sentencing, Tyler had already served 267 days in confinement. It's worth noting that Tyler stood in court and delivered a heartfelt apology. He expressed deep remorse for his actions and even wished that he could have swapped places with Haley, a sentiment that was profoundly moving to everyone present. Speaking of those in attendance, a dozen of Haley's friends and family members were there to witness the proceedings. Their grief and pain were palpable in the courtroom, serving as a poignant reminder of the devastating impact of Tyler's actions that day. According to Tyler's family's lawyer, it was revealed that Tyler had been under the influence of methamphetamine at the time of the crash. Furthermore, toxicology reports indicated the presence of THC and amphetamine in his system. These findings shed light on the extent of Tyler's impairment and the factors that contributed to the tragic accident. 9. Jared Cano. Meet Jared Cano, an 18-year-old who used to call Tampa, Florida, his home. But now, he's facing a tough sentence: 15 years in prison. What led to this harsh punishment? It all began when Jared was just 16 years old, a time when most kids were busy with school and friends. However, Jared's story took a dark turn. He was charged with planning a massacre at Freedom High School. Trying to steer him away from a life behind bars, his attorney pleaded for juvenile punishment and rehabilitation in a mental health treatment facility. But things didn't go as planned. Circuit Judge Kimberly Fernandez had a difficult decision to make. She had to determine whether Jared was a seriously dangerous individual or just a confused young person making empty threats. It's a tough call, no doubt. Jared's private counsel, Norman Cannella SR, is even considering filing a request for mitigation, hoping to soften the sentence and give Jared another chance. The severity of the sentence took many people aback. Some criminal defense attorneys in Tampa Bay believed that to consider such a request, the judge might want to see additional facts that weren't presented in court initially. It's somewhat similar to getting a psychiatric report or taking a polygraph test. Cannella can file an appeal, and that's exactly what he plans to do. In the Second District Court appeal, Cannella aims to challenge the judge's decision not to dismiss Jared's most serious charges, even though Jared didn't directly threaten anyone, as his attorney claims. Jared's charges include threatening to use a harmful device and attempting to create, possess, or use a destructive device with intent to cause damage. But here's the twist. Jared's intentions remained a secret in his room. The only person who knew about them was a friend, who eventually alerted the authorities. Detectives later revealed that at the age of 17, Jared had plotted to bomb Freedom High School on the first day of school. However, this shocking plan, detailed in his notebook and cell phone videos, only came to light after Jared's arrest. The case becomes even murkier when we examine the meaning of a threat. Bruce Jacob, a law professor at Stetson University, questions whether Jared merely talking to a friend about his ambitions qualifies as a threat. It's a valid point and something that might be considered in the upcoming appeal. While opinions on the sentencing vary, most people acknowledge that Judge Fernandez had an incredibly challenging job on her hands. Jared Cano, now 18, was found guilty and sentenced to 15 years in prison for his plans to unleash chaos at his school. But whether this sentence is justified depends on one crucial question. Did Jared truly intend to carry out his dark plans? Attorney Dennis Devlaming suggests that if Jared's intentions were serious, then the judge's decision seems reasonable. On the other hand, if his objectives were merely speculative, then the punishment might indeed seem disproportionate. In the end, it all comes down to a dilemma we often face in cases like this. Can we truly predict someone's actions before they happen? Tampa criminal defense attorney Jeff Polk puts it best, saying, "In these shooting cases, like Columbine, everyone wants to know why nothing was done to prevent it. Unfortunately, it's challenging to discern whether someone is truly a threat before they act." 8. Aiden Fucci. In 2021, down in Florida, a teenager named Aiden Fucci ended up in serious trouble. He got himself into a situation that would change his life forever. Aiden was just 16 years old when he did something unimaginable. He stabbed a 13-year-old boy over 100 times, and it sent shockwaves through the community. Fast forward to March 24, 2023, and Aiden was facing the consequences of his actions. He had already pleaded guilty to the charge of first-degree murder, and now it was time for him to hear his fate. The judge, Arlie Smith, didn't mince words in a courtroom packed with tension. He said, "Aiden Fucci, I find you guilty of the premeditated first-degree murder of Tristan Bailey. I'm sentencing you to life in jail." Imagine being just 16 years old and hearing those words. Aiden had pled guilty back in February 2023, so he knew this day was coming. He knew he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. During the sentencing hearing, Judge Smith considered several factors. He thought about Aiden's young age, the careful planning that went into the crime, and the fact that Aiden acted alone, without any outside pressure. All these things weighed on the judge's mind as he made his decision. Now let's talk about Aiden's demeanor in court. It was inconsistent, to say the least. In his last appearance in October, he had a cross tattoo visible on his middle finger. He seemed alert, but didn't have much to say during the pre-trial hearing. And in the courtroom, the victim's family was there too, feeling the pain of their loss. But Aiden's case isn't the only one that made headlines involving young people facing life-altering consequences. There's another story of a 19-year-old named Alexis Rogers. She found herself in a deadly road rage shooting case. She appeared in court for a hearing to decide if she would be held in custody until her trial. 7. Alexis Rogers. In a courtroom filled with tension, 19-year-old Alexis Rogers found herself facing a grim future. She stood accused in a chilling case of deadly road rage, and today marked a crucial hearing to decide whether she would remain in custody until her trial. As Alexis entered the courtroom, tears welled up in her eyes, and they continued to flow throughout the proceedings. Her defense team fervently argued that the tragic events that unfolded over the weekend were not entirely her fault. Here's what went down. On the night of March 20th, Alexis was behind the wheel of a black Mercedes, cruising along the South Valley Road. Up ahead, a Dodge Challenger driver abruptly made a left turn, only to change their mind and rejoin the original path. A heated exchange of words between the two drivers followed, with Alexis tailing the Dodge. Things took a dark turn when Alexis's 16-year-old passenger, Damian Luna, pulled out a firearm and opened fire on the other car, taking the life of Efren Azarti. In a frantic bid to escape justice, Alexis and Luna embarked on a multi-state run, seeking refuge in Texas, Nevada, and Colorado. During her interview with Detective James Fredrickson, Alexis revealed why she had not come forward after the fatal shooting. She claimed to be in fear of Damian, alleging that he had subjected her to physical abuse. She provided a shocking detail. She had been under the influence of the anti-anxiety medication Xanax on the night of the murder. As the courtroom drama unfolded, the pretrial detention hearing was pushed to the following week. Alexis had acquired new legal representation, and they needed time to get up to speed on the case. An additional layer of mystery shrouded the situation, as it remained uncertain whether Alexis and the suspected shooter, Luna, shared a romantic relationship. 6. Willard Miller. In Fairfield, Iowa, a shocking incident involving two teenagers has left a community in disbelief. Willard Miller, just 16 years old, was charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a forcible felony in connection with the tragic death of his high school Spanish teacher, Nohema Graver. The dreadful event unfolded on November 21, 2021, when Willard and his classmate Jeremy Goodale were accused of brutally ending Nohema Graver's life using a baseball bat. The court documents reveal a chilling plot by these young individuals to take the life of their teacher, who had dedicated herself to teaching at Fairfield High School since 2012. Their sinister plan involved closely shadowing her daily routine, waiting for the moment to ambush her during her usual walk in the park. With cold determination, they executed their horrifying act, using a baseball bat as their weapon of choice, and then went to great lengths to hide the evidence. Fast forward to April 2023, and Willard found himself in court, pleading guilty to the charge of first-degree murder. This plea resulted in life in prison, with a mandatory minimum sentence of 35 years. During his sentencing hearing, Willard, who was just a teenager, couldn't hide his emotions and tears. His legal team had hoped for a more lenient sentence, but the judge weighed various factors, including his young age and the premeditated nature of the crime, ultimately deciding on a harsh sentence. Meanwhile, Jeremy Goodale, Willard's co-conspirator, also admitted guilt in the murder case. He was even prepared to testify against Willard. His sentencing date was set for the following month, and according to his plea agreement, prosecutors would seek a mandatory minimum sentence of 25 years. This tragic case highlights the grim reality of teenagers being involved in serious criminal activities, leaving everyone stunned. As the legal process unfolds, it raises questions about the responsibility of these young individuals and the consequences they face for their actions. 5. Jennifer Pruitt. In 1993, Jennifer Pruitt found herself facing a life sentence in prison at the tender age of 17. Her crime? Involvement in the murder of a 75-year-old man. Fast forward to today, Jennifer, now in her 40s, sees a glimmer of hope on the horizon, as she may have a shot at parole in just 5.5 years. The incident that led to Jennifer's imprisonment occurred in 1992, when she was just a teenager. Elmer Hachel, a 75-year-old neighbor, tragically lost his life in a stabbing. However, it's essential to note that Jennifer didn't wield the knife herself. Instead, another woman named Donnell Miracle committed the actual act. Nonetheless, Jennifer found herself convicted of murder because she had embarked on a robbery plan with Elmer, and when things turned violent, she did nothing to intervene. Jennifer's legal journey was not without its share of challenges. During her court proceedings, she wasn't physically present, but instead appeared via video link from the Women's Hurons Valley Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, where she had been incarcerated. Even as the additional penalty was handed down, Jennifer remained steadfast in her resolve. In a recent interview with the Free Press, Jennifer candidly expressed her fears about potentially receiving a 40-year sentence, a sentence that the prosecutor, Jessica Cooper, had sought. The waiting period leading up to this point had been filled with emotional turmoil for Jennifer. Her attorney, Robin Frankel, had advocated for a 25-year sentence, which, if granted, would have made her eligible for parole this fall. Unfortunately, after the hearing, Frankel couldn't hide his disappointment. The journey hasn't been easy for Jennifer, who had long resigned herself to the idea that she might never see the light of day as a free person. But now, she has a glimmer of hope on the horizon, as the possibility of parole looms just 5.5 years away. It's a chance at redemption for Jennifer to rebuild her life outside of prison walls. Only time will tell whether this glimmer of hope will turn into a reality for Jennifer Pruitt, the teenager who found herself entangled in a web of circumstances that forever altered the course of her life. 4. Jessie Owens. In 1998, a 17-year-old girl named Jessie Owens found herself in a life-altering situation in Waterton, South Dakota. She and an older friend had broken into a house with the intention of stealing money. However, their plans took a horrific turn when the homeowner unexpectedly walked in. Faced with this terrifying moment, Jessie resorted to violence, using a hammer to kill the homeowner during the robbery. This tragic event led to her receiving a life sentence in prison with no hope of ever being released. Fast forward to 2014, and Jessie's life took a different turn. Her lawyer sought the expertise of Dr. Anthony Kavanaugh, a forensic psychologist, to reevaluate her case. This reconsideration was prompted by a significant ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court in the case of Miller v. Alabama. The court had ruled that mandatory life sentences without the possibility of parole for juvenile offenders who had committed homicide violated the Constitution's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. Dr. Kavanaugh shed light on Jessie's troubled past during the resentencing hearing before the court. He revealed that Jessie had experienced a tumultuous childhood marked by abuse and abandonment. As a teenager, she turned to drugs and alcohol as a way to cope with her difficult circumstances. However, her time behind bars had transformed her. Jessie had earned her GED and had worked diligently in various jobs within the prison system. She even displayed remarkable compassion by volunteering to care for a dying inmate. Dr. Kavanaugh also emphasized a crucial aspect of Jessie's case. At the time of her initial sentencing, she hadn't fully grasped her actions' profound impact on her family and the community. This newfound understanding of her background and personal growth led to a significant change in her sentence. Instead of facing life in prison, Jessie's sentence was reduced to 40 years behind bars. Jessie's story is not unique. She is just one of more than 2,000 prisoners in the United States who have become eligible for resentencing. This change in their fate is due to the recognition that serving life sentences without the possibility of release for crimes committed during their adolescence goes against the principles of justice and fairness. It is a shift in perspective that acknowledges the potential for rehabilitation and transformation, even in those who have committed the most serious offenses as teenagers. 3. Fernando Salgado. Fernando Salgado, an 18-year-old Fontana's A.B. Miller High School student, was arrested in late June 2012 for his suspected involvement in a hazing scandal. During a summer school masonry course, Fernando allegedly attempted to insert a piece of rebar into the torso of another pupil. Prosecutors assert this. A broom handle was allegedly used in a similar incident. In exchange for a sentencing stay, Fernando accepted a plea deal in which he pleaded guilty to 1 count of sexual penetration with a foreign object and 1 count of assault with a deadly weapon. If Fernando testifies truthfully against his teacher, Emmanuel de la Rosa, he faces up to 4 years in prison. The penalty, however, will be suspended if he testifies truthfully against Mr. de la Rosa. Fernando will then enter a not guilty plea to the attempted sexual penetration charge, leaving only the assault allegation. At this point, he would face 3 years of felony probation and 180 days in county jail on weekends. Fernando was released from jail on Monday evening after signing the plea agreement. 2. Julio Cesar Rivera. Julio Cesar Rivera found himself in a dire situation as a teenager. He was involved in a series of dangerous carjackings during October and November of 2021, all while he was just 18 years old. This reckless spree of crime led to devastating consequences. One evening, outside a Whole Foods store in Alama Quarry Market, Julio's actions took a horrifying turn. Armed with a revolver, he attempted a carjacking that ended in tragedy. During this failed attempt, he shot Alana Castañeda in the face, leaving her with life-altering injuries. Facing the weight of his actions, Julio decided to strike a deal with the prosecutors earlier this year. In this agreement, he admitted his guilt in 3 separate cases, including the one involving Alana. While reducing the potential prison sentence he could have faced after a trial, this move came with a significant trade-off. Julio forfeited his right to appeal his sentence, locking himself into whatever judgment the court would deliver. The day of reckoning arrived when Julio Cesar Rivera received his sentence in district court. Alana was present in the courtroom, bearing the scars and trauma from that fateful night. She bravely requested the full 45-year sentence for Julio, hoping that justice would be served. Alana, having undergone 3 surgeries with a 4th on the horizon to restore her vision, knew the long road to healing that lay ahead. As the judge pronounced the life sentence, it marked the end of a painful journey for Alana. Tears streamed down her face, not just for herself, but also for the other victims who had suffered at Julio's hands. 1. Fernicia Torres. Fernicia Torres, a 17-year-old girl from Suwanee, Georgia, was in a tough situation a few years back. It was back in 2018 when she and 2 other teenagers got into serious trouble. They were accused of doing something really bad: murder and armed robbery. Yes, you heard it right. A 17-year-old involved in such a serious crime. This wasn't the only problem for Fernicia and her buddies. Before this incident, they were already in trouble for some other robberies in Suwanee, so it was like a series of bad decisions for them. Now picture this. Fernicia, a young mom, was in court, and the judge was telling her that she was being charged with murder. Can you imagine the shock on her face? She didn't see that coming at all. There's even a video from WSB-TV that shows her looking totally surprised. In the video, you can see Fernicia giving some pretty intense glares to her 2 co-defendants. She was probably thinking, how did we end up in this mess? It's a tough situation for anyone, especially a teenager, to be in. So Fernicia Torres, a 17-year-old from Suwanee, Georgia, got caught up in a serious crime involving murder and armed robbery charges, and when she heard the judge read those charges in court, she couldn't hide her surprise. As you can see in the video, it's a story that makes you wonder how these young people got themselves into such a dangerous situation.